Hello everyone, welcome to 10-Minute Physiology. In today's video, we're going to talk about how certain types of hormones and neurotransmitters control vascular tone. So with that, let's begin. So I'd like to start off by first talking about how vascular smooth muscle cells contract in the first place. So this right here is the plasma membrane of a vascular smooth muscle cell. And when we're talking about the contraction of vascular smooth muscle cells, we're usually going to talk about three ways in which contraction can occur. So the first way in which vascular smooth muscle cell contraction can occur is, of course, through increasing the calcium level. So when we increase calcium, this causes calcium to bind to a protein called calmodulin. So when four calciums bind to calmodulin, the calcium-calmodulin complex will go interact with another protein called myosin light chain kinase. So myosin light chain kinase is a kinase protein that phosphorylates the myosin light chain, and it therefore leads to contraction. So when calcium binds to calmodulin, the complex will go to myosin light chain kinase, and it will bind to it, causing a conformational change, which will therefore lead to the opening up of the binding site on myosin light chain kinase. So when the binding site on myosin light chain kinase opens up, it will lead to the phosphorylation of myosin light chain, which will therefore lead to vascular smooth muscle cell contraction. So what are some other ways in which vascular smooth muscle cells can contract? Well, the second way in which vascular smooth muscle cells can contract is through decreasing cyclic AMP. So when we decrease cyclic AMP, this will lead to a decrease in the activation of protein kinase A, or PKA. Now, protein kinase A is also a kinase, and what it can do is it can actually phosphorylate myosin light chain kinase. So when you phosphorylate myosin light chain kinase, this actually decreases the activity of it, and it can therefore lead to relaxation. So if you decrease the activity of PKA, this leads to a decrease in the phosphorylation of myosin light chain kinase. And when we decrease the level of phosphorylation on myosin light chain kinase, this increases its activity. This therefore allows more myosin light chain to be phosphorylated, which will therefore lead to vascular smooth muscle cell contraction. So when we decrease cyclic AMP, this leads to vascular smooth muscle cell contraction. Now the third way is very similar to cyclic AMP. So when we decrease cyclic GMP, this leads to a decrease in the activation of PKG, which therefore leads to a decrease in the level of myosin light chain kinase phosphorylation, which therefore leads to an increase in the activity, which therefore leads to increased myosin light chain phosphorylation, which therefore leads to vascular smooth muscle cell contraction. So in general, anything that increases the myosin light chain kinase activity or decreases the phosphorylation of myosin light chain kinase will promote vascular smooth muscle cell contraction. So the three things that will basically increase the activity of this protein will be increasing the calcium levels, decreasing cyclic AMP, and decreasing cyclic GMP. When you do the opposite of these three things, you can get relaxation. So anything that decreases the myosin light chain kinase activity or increases its phosphorylation will promote relaxation. So this would be decreasing calcium, increasing cyclic AMP, and increasing cyclic GMP. So now that we know how vascular smooth muscle cells contract, let's talk about how different hormones and neurotransmitters can affect vascular tone. So what hormones and neurotransmitters will we look at? So the first one that we're going to look at is angiotensin II. So angiotensin II is a hormone that is produced by angiotensin converting enzyme, and this enzyme converts angiotensin I into angiotensin II. And the main function of angiotensin II is to increase aldosterone secretion. So aldosterone is basically this corticosteroid, which is released by your adrenal glands, which therefore leads to sodium and water retention in the kidney. We're going to be talking a lot more about this hormone and aldosterone when we talk about the kidneys. So the next one that we're going to talk about is ADH, or AVP. ADH is a hormone that's going to be released by the posterior pituitary, and it increases water absorption in the collecting duct of the kidney, and it does this by stimulating the insertion of aquaporins into the collecting duct. This is another hormone that we're going to talk a lot about in the kidney unit. The third hormone or neurotransmitter that we're going to talk about is serotonin. So serotonin, or 5-HT, is a very important neurotransmitter that's going to be involved in many different processes. We're also going to be talking about a few peptide hormones. We'll talk about histamine, and then lastly, we'll also talk about endothelin, which is actually a peptide hormone released by the endothelial cells themselves. So now that we know a basic description of what each of these hormones and neurotransmitters are, let's talk about how they affect vascular tone. So the first group of hormones that we're going to look at are the following. So the first ones are angiotensin II, ADH, serotonin, and endothelin. So remember that Ang2, ADH, and endothelin are hormones, and 5-HT, or serotonin, is going to be a neurotransmitter. Now, all of these signaling molecules bind to the same type of G protein coupled receptor, a GQ protein coupled receptor. And what are going to be the effects of this GQ protein coupled receptor? So let's just say we have our receptor here, and this receptor for all four of these signal molecules is a GQ receptor. So what happens is that the ligand comes in and binds to the receptor, activating the GQ protein. The GQ protein will then go to phospholipase C, increase the production of IP3, which will therefore lead to increased calcium. And when we lead to increased calcium, this calcium binds to calmodulin, which opens up that binding site on myosin light chain kinase, which therefore leads to contraction. So angiotensin II, ADH, serotonin, and endothelin all cause vascular smooth muscle cell contraction. And this table here just tells you the names of the receptors that they bind to. Now, interestingly, endothelin, the peptide hormone that is released by the endothelial cells, is actually going to be one of the most powerful vasoconstrictors in your body. So now that we know what these four do, let's look at what the other types of signaling molecules do and how they affect vascular tone. So the next signaling molecule that we're going to look at on that list is neuropeptide Y. So neuropeptide Y, which we see here, binds to the Y1R receptor, and the Y1R receptor is a GI receptor. So when neuropeptide Y binds to the Y1 receptor, it activates GI, which goes to adenylate cyclase, which inhibits the production of ATP to cyclic AMP. So remember, adenylate cyclase is an enzyme that catalyzes the conversion of ATP to cyclic AMP, and what the GI G protein coupled receptor does is it inhibits this enzyme, adenylate cyclase, which therefore decreases cyclic AMP levels. So when we decrease cyclic AMP, this leads to a decrease in the activation of pKa, which leads to a decrease in the level of myosin light chain kinase phosphorylation, which increases its activity, which therefore leads to vascular smooth muscle cell contraction. So now let's look at the last couple of signaling molecules. So the last couple of signaling molecules are histamine and VIP. So both of these signaling molecules are going to bind to GS proteins. So how are these particular signaling molecules going to affect vascular tone? So let's just say we have our receptor and we have our ligand, and this receptor is coupled to a GS protein. So the ligand comes in, binds to the receptor, and activates the GS protein, and the GS protein goes over and it activates adenylate cyclase. When it activates adenylate cyclase, it increases the production of cyclic AMP, which leads to an increase in the activation of pKa, which leads to an increase in MLCK phosphorylation, which leads to decreased MLCK activity, which therefore leads to vascular smooth muscle cell relaxation. So both histamine and VIP cause vascular smooth muscle cell relaxation, and here are the receptors that they bind to here. So in summary, I have this table here telling you what each of the signaling molecules does, the receptor that they bind to, and the particular G protein that they are coupled to, and the effect. So I hope this video helped you understand how different signaling molecules affect vascular tone, and I hope to see you in the next one. Good luck studying, and thank you for watching.